Hello and welcome back to Seconds Out. My name is Ayman Khan. Once again, having the pleasure to be joined by Hall of Fame boxing writer Thomas Hauser. Thomas, it's good to speak to you again. And I know that I've mentioned you as Hall of Fame boxing writer, but you've been putting pen to paper with a new book on the way. Let's know more about that book, Thomas.
Okay, well, let me hold up a copy at the start. I never quite know how to hold things up in front of a computer, but I hope this gets there. The book is called My Mother and Me. It's a memoir. My mother died a year and a half ago at age 96 after a long, privileged, very interesting life. And this is a book that tracks her life from beginning to end. One of the things that I realized when I began writing was that I couldn't write about my mother and our relationship without also writing about me. So I'm part of it as well. I'm not going to pretend it's a boxing book, although there certainly are, anecdotes relating to my mother and Muhammad Ali, my mother and Don King, a number of other boxing personalities, and other, people like Barbara Streisand filter in and out. But for anybody who has an aging parent or, wants a glimpse at my life, the way it really has been, I think it's a good read. I'm very pleased with it. I wanted my mother to have this marker. The fact of life is that 99.999% of the people who ever lived are completely gone and forgotten 50 years after they die. They might be pictures in a scrapbook or names on a family tree, but people really don't know who they were, what they did, what they were like. And now my mother has this forever. This is who she was. This is what she did. One of the things she knew I'd be writing this book. And she said to me, I want you to be honest. I don't want you to make me out to be a saint. And then she added, the affairs were part of, my marriage. And you can write about them too. So I wrote about them too. It's a good read. I think people will enjoy it. And I'm certainly interested in hearing from anybody who reads it. You can pre-order now on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble. It's available in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle. And my email address is out there. I'd be interested in hearing from people who read it.
What was that process like, putting pen to paper on those memories? I imagine it might have been a bit of an emotional affair. And also, what was your mother's feelings about your career into boxing and writing specifically?
Well, as you know, I started out as a lawyer on Wall Street. I was a litigator at a large Wall Street law firm called Cravath, Swaine and Moore. I did that for 5 years. Then I transitioned to writing. And initially, my mother was concerned just because she wanted me to be, able to support myself, to support a family. And let's face it, freelance writing is a chancy endeavor, whereas I had a very secure job with a law firm on Wall Street. But then my first book, Missing, was made into a feature film starring Jack Lemmon and Sissy Spacek. And this is actually one of the anecdotes I recount in the book, My Mother and Me. Universal arranged for a screening about 2 weeks before the film opened. They said to me, we have a screening room. There are 30 seats in it. Invite any 30 people you want, and we'll show them the movie. So my mother obviously was one of the 30 people I invited. She, looked at me when it was over and said, "This is a real movie." I said, "Well, of course it's a real movie." She said, "Yeah, but it has Jack Lemmon and Sissy Spacek. It's a real movie. I thought it was going to be a documentary or something." But she got quite pleased as my writing career went on. And of course, she loved some of the trappings that went with it, including meeting, Muhammad Ali, which was quite a treat for anybody who met Muhammad Ali. And she, at the end of the day, she understood that I had pursued the career and was living the life that was right for me. And leaving the law to write was certainly one of the best fundamental decisions I've made in my life. And writing this book was difficult in some ways because I had to find the right formula.
Mm.
Usually when I sit down to write, the first chapter is a little hard and then it flows smoothly from there. And here I finished the first chapter and it didn't fit. It wasn't right. And I had to go back, later on, rewrite it, and then say, okay, where am I now? A couple of friends were very helpful to me in reading the manuscript critically as I was going along. It doesn't help if all people say is, oh, it's wonderful, I love it. That doesn't help me make it better. Here, people were honest in their criticism. And I finally found the right formula. As I said, one of the things I had to understand, I mentioned this to you just now, it's not a question of ego, but in order to write about my relationship with my mother, I had to write about me and who I am, what I've experienced, what I've gone through. And then once I found the right formula, the right balance, it really flowed very easily from that point on. And it was a joy to write. People say, oh, was this some sort of great catharsis? No, not really. I mean, my mother was 96 when she died. As I said, she had a long, privileged life. And it was time. I was actually surprised at how little I grieved after she died because I loved her enormously. I really did. But I felt as though her time had come. She loved living. She had said for a long time, look, life doesn't owe me anything. If I wake up tonight, spend the day doing what I do, go to bed, and then don't wake up the next morning, I'm fine with that. I've been lucky from the day I was born. And the last 5 weeks of her life were not good. The last 5 weeks, she really didn't, didn't enjoy living anymore and wanted to die due to a fall she'd had. And so it was really time. It was time. You let someone go out of love. And that's what I did in this case. And so the book was really, yeah, sure, I went through a lot of old memories and revisited a lot of old times in my head, not just with my mother, but with my father and other family members. But I wrote it for her. And I realized when I was done, I'm also very happy to have my mother and me for me. To me, it's a very important part of my creative legacy. And it's certainly the most personal writing I've ever done. There are bits and pieces of me in lots of my books, some more overtly than others. But this is, straightforward personal memoir. And so if someone is interested in knowing a bit more about Thomas Hauser and how I got to where I am today, who I am, what my values are, my mother and me is a good place to start.
Certainly sounds like a good read, Thomas. I can certainly relate as well to a bit of parental trepidation when it came to leaving the legal field to go into boxing as well, on my end as well too. So I can sympathize in those sort of senses. Moving on to the boxing world itself, I want to tie up a loose end before we get into the crux of the interview. You put out an offer to Eddie Hearn regarding sitting down for a few hours and hashing a few things out. I put that offer to Eddie Hearn and in his own charming way rejected the offer to sit down. I imagine that was something you'd expected.
I heard his rejection. Somebody sent me a video of it, and it was typical Eddie Hearn. Look, Eddie can talk all he wants. Eddie loves, interviews and conversations with people who aren't familiar with the underlying facts of multiple situations and aren't going to call him on some of the things he says. So I can understand very much why he wouldn't want to sit down with me in an open-ended forum to discuss these issues. The offer is there. Anytime he wants to take me up on it, I'm here. But, I find it a little strange that Eddie likes to take pot shots at me and, lob his grenades at me from a safe distance, but won't really sit down and do it face to face with me and let me confront him with the facts. But, that's Eddie's choice.
He was still, however, still charming and keen to hear what you thought about and to Joshua versus Francis Ngannou, at least if his recent IFL interviews anything to go by. So let's get into that. What conclusions did you draw from Joshua versus Ngannou last Friday?
Anthony Joshua did what he was supposed to. I just wrote an article about the fight for Boxing News in the UK. And what I wrote at one point was shame on Tyson Fury, good for Anthony Joshua. Tyson Fury should be embarrassed, and very well might be, for the performance that he put on against Francis Ngannou last year. He went into the ring for that fight and fought like a man who'd been training by swilling beer and eating donuts. I mean, he was out of shape. His timing was off. He seemed to lack stamina. It was an embarrassing performance. And it surprised me, quite frankly, because up until then, I had thought of Tyson Fury as the best heavyweight in the world. And it's really very confusing now. You know, Tyson Fury looked dreadful against Ngannou. Deontay Wilder, looked dreadful against Joseph Parker. I was wrong on that fight, too. I thought Wilder would win that fight with ease. Alexander Usyk certainly looks flawed. He looks very vulnerable to hard punchers. I think you have to look at the picture and say that the winner of Fury Usyk legitimately deserves to be called the best heavyweight in the world right now. If I had to pick a winner, I would pick Tyson Fury. I'll look at Fury and Ngannou as an aberration due to Fury's poor training for it. But the worst thing about that fight for me was it fed into all of the delusions regarding what I call trash boxing. The idea that somebody can transition from MMA to boxing seamlessly, or just go into the gym and train for a year and be a real professional fighter. No, that's like saying that's because somebody is good at dancing in bars, they can be the prima ballerina for the Metropolitan Ballet Company. I mean, boxing is a skill. I give Ngannou credit for hanging in there with Fury. But that to me was like Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather Jr. I mean, I don't think anybody who understands boxing seriously suggests that Conor McGregor was on a level to fight competitively with Floyd Mayweather. Floyd basically didn't show up for that fight. So, look, boxing has been shooting itself in the foot long enough that it probably has lost the foot. What more can I say? But Anthony Joshua did what he had to do. Good for him.
Was the way he dispatched of Ngannou enough to add fuel to the fire for those who are claiming that Anthony Joshua is back, is on the resurgence, and is cementing his place back at the top of the sport?
Look, Anthony Joshua has had a couple of fights recently where he has seemed to get better. After losing to Usyk, and you'll have to take me through this. Was it Jermaine Franklin he fought next?
Franklin. Then it was Hellenius.
He fought Franklin next, and let's face it, looked dreadful. He really looked terrible. I thought Carl Froch summed that up very nicely. Then he fought Hellenius, who is getting used to being knocked unconscious these days and wasn't much of a test. Fought Otto Wallin. None of these are real serious heavyweight challenges. And then he looked good against a novice with one heavyweight fight on his resume, who let him, line Ngannou up, reach back, and sort of stood there as Joshua fired his best right hand. And we understand that Anthony has a very, very good right hand. So does Anthony look better now than he did several fights ago? Yes, but he hasn't been tested. Let's see what happens when he gets in the ring with somebody who tests him. Quite frankly, I don't know at this point who wins between Joshua and Fury, Joshua Wilder. 6 months ago, I would have said Fury and Wilder beat Joshua. they both look so dreadful in their last outings, it's hard to tell. So, we'll see. That's one of the things that makes boxing interesting. But I'd like, people to dial down a little bit on the hype. I know they won't. But, let's just get some good fights. Let's have, one good fight at a time, starting with Fury Usyk. The person who comes out on top of that has a legitimate claim to being the heavyweight champion of the world and the best heavyweight in the world. As I said before, I think it will be Fury. But as I also said, I've been wrong before.
Yeah, speaking on, because that's what's happened in the wake of how Joshua dispatched of Ngannou. People are cross-referencing the performances that both Fury and Joshua had against that common opponent and other common opponents. I believe the statistic is that all opponents that Fury and Joshua shared, Joshua has either stopped or knocked them out, whereas Fury's not done that, of course. Is that, we talked about fuel to the fire, is that fuel to the fire that if the two were to meet, that being Joshua and Fury, that Joshua might be the one that's favored, at least from your point of view, in that fight?
No, you have to look at where fighters are now. Now meaning when they get in the ring to fight. And by the way, I think if I recall, my boxing history correctly, didn't Tyson Fury dispatch of Dillian White somewhat more dispositively than Anthony Joshua did? So, but no, but what they did years ago doesn't matter in terms of who is the best in the world now. What will happen when they get in the ring now? So let's see first how Fury does against Usyk. Then presumably they have to fight a second time. We have to know who Joshua fights in the interim. What's happening in their heads? I don't know. I mean, anything can affect a fighter's head. A fighter can fall madly in love, be spurned. All of a sudden, he looks like a dead man in the ring. Let's see where they are. Bruce Trampler, who I think is the best matchmaker in the business now. Whenever I ask him, who I think is going to win a particular fight, he says, I want to see how they look during fight week. Well, let's see at least how they look through the fights before they sign to fight, before we make a judgment as to who will win that fight.
What's the likely course of action you feel for Anthony Joshua? Because now he's in holding, waiting for the winner of Fury versus Usyk. Parker has resurged and has beaten Deontay Wilder and Zhilei Zhang since. Dylan White, quite intriguingly, is having a quick return and run out this weekend on Sunday against Christian Hammer, and he was in the frame before he'd tested positive. Philip Hrgović is also someone who's waiting in the wings for an opportunity. Maybe Joshua and Hrgović can be matched up whilst Fury and Usyk happens as well. But what do you feel is the next course of action in terms of an opponent for Joshua who's going to give him that test that you're looking for?
Well, look, AJ and Eddie Hearn follow the money. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it's a good thing as a general rule. And I would think if they can effectuate it, the next logical step would be to have the winner of Fury Usyk stripped by the IBF if they can accomplish that end. And then Joshua and Hrgović would fight for the IBF heavyweight title. And there'd be a certain amount of money attached to that fight. There would be a belt to that fight. And then, of course, the winner of Fury Usyk would no longer have all four belts. The winner of Fury Usyk would still be the heavyweight champion of the world, but we'd get into this whole belt nonsense again. But I would look, I don't think we're going to see a rematch between AJ and Ngannou. We can wipe that off the board. So now I would think the most likely fight for AJ, if the winner of Fury Usyk is stripped, is a fight against Hrgović for the IBF title. And to be honest, I don't think much of Hrgović as a fighter. I don't think of him as being an elite heavyweight. He's been maneuvered to that position as a mandatory challenger. He hasn't had a serious fight in quite a while now. So I suspect his skills might have atrophied a bit. And that's a fight that I think AJ wins fairly easily.
Thomas, moving on to a couple topics before I let you go. First of all, I wanted to discuss with you the, I don't know how to put this, but the situation I guess Ryan Garcia finds himself in. As I've been watching this, I maybe kind of thought he might have been playing a couple of games, but as the days and weeks have passed, it seems to be that Ryan Garcia is in need of some form of help. I wonder what you make of that situation heading into a fight with Devin Haney.
I have the impression I was at the New York press conference, which was not nearly as erratic, if you will. He was not nearly as erratic in New York as he was in Los Angeles, but he was still acting very strangely in New York. And I turned to the person sitting next to me and said, I'm not sure this fight happens. I don't know if he makes it to the fight. Let me go back a step and say, my one exposure to Ryan Garcia was one where I had a very nice impression of him. As you know, I very often I'll spend the hours before and after a fight in the dressing room with one of the fighters. I've done that, I think, on 5 different occasions with Canelo Alvarez. When Canelo fought Sergey Kovalev, I was in Canelo's dressing room for the fight. I always arrive early. Ryan Garcia was on the undercard. I think he fought, was it Philippe Duno in that fight?
Mm-hmm.
Some minor belt, knocked Duno out in the first round. Garcia was in the dressing room long before Canelo arrived. And he was in the center of the room. He had his music on. The second Canelo walked into the room, Ryan, without any prompting, turned off his music, walked into the corner of the room. It was like a very gracious and appropriate way of saying to Canelo, look, this is your dressing room. You're the star. I'm really a guest here, and I'm out of the way now. That impressed me. The other thing that impressed me that night was Ryan knocked Duno out in the first round, came back to the dressing room with a belt. And then the sanctioning body's supervisor came into the room and said to Ryan, we have to give the belt back to Duno. We'll mail you a new one, but this one goes back to him. I can bring it back, or you can come with me and give it to him yourself. So Ryan said, I'll go with you. And Ryan left. He came back and he sat down next to me and he said, wow, that was really sad. I went into the dressing room and Duno was crying. And I felt so bad for him. And that was legitimate. That showed an empathy that I was very impressed by. So I think Ryan has a lot of good in him. Having said that, I find his recent behavior very frightening. I don't think it's an act. I think it's where he's at this point in time. I'm not a mental health care professional. Presumably, mental health care professionals, either associated with Ryan or the New York State Athletic Commission, will make the judgment as to whether or not the fight should go forward. I wish him everything well, and we'll see where it leads.
The other fight as well, another intriguing situation we find ourselves in is that Mike Tyson is returning to action in some form, whether it be an exhibition or a straight fight, as it was against Jake Paul, launching on Netflix. Mike Tyson, 58, didn't look the best of shape against Roy Jones Jr. last time out, but is back in action again. Having seen and followed Mike's career, where do you stand on his latest outing?
I think it's very sad. I mean, can you imagine what would happen if Jake Paul played, pick up basketball and then said, I'm going to play a one-on-one game against Julius Erving or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and the whole basketball universe started talking about that? Or if Jake Paul was playing tennis and said, okay, I'm going to play tennis against I don't know if John McEnroe's 68 years old yet, but I mean, it shows the sad state of boxing today, that this trash boxing, is at this level. And it's a very short line from Jake Paul and Mike Tyson to Fury and Ngannou. And I don't criticize Jake Paul for this, by the way. From my point of view, I look at Jake Paul and he has gone into the gym. He has trained very, very hard to be the best boxer that he can be. So good for him that he's doing this, but it speaks very poorly for boxing that Jake Paul against a 58-year-old man might be the most talked about fight this year. That it might, and certainly in some circles, it will get more attention, particularly in mainstream circles with the mainstream media. It will get more attention than Tyson Fury against Alexander Usyk for the heavyweight championship of the world.
Can we equate that same thinking to the potential talks, as we believe it to be, between Manny Pacquiao and Conor Benn? Is that along the same lines? Because a lot of hardcore boxing fans are drawing that comparison.
It's not as bad because Pacquiao's 45 instead of 58, but he's not Manny Pacquiao anymore. We understand that. We also understand that Conor Benn still hasn't cleared up all the PED questions, which is another issue. When I find it almost embarrassing when Sky breathlessly reports that Dillian White has been officially cleared to fight based on an expert report that he has been completely exonerated. I mean, did Sky ask who was he cleared by? Who prepared the expert report? I mean, I don't know the answer, but I'd like to know, is this an expert that Dillian or somebody affiliated with Dillian hired and paid? What does the report say? I mean, I would be skeptical that this was a report prepared by somebody who was totally independent. I don't think he went to Margaret Goodman at VADA and said, can you either review these documents or find somebody you suggest will? And then, of course, Dillian's fighting somebody who probably shouldn't be fighting anymore. Christian Hamer, I don't have his record in front of me, but has he won something like 3 fights in the last 5 years, and the 3 people he beat had something like 93 losses between them. So, I'd like to see people be a little more discerning, when it comes to PED use in boxing, and a little more upfront and honest about it. But to go back to the competitive merits of Conor Benn against Manny Pacquiao, I mean, I don't want to see Manny Pacquiao fighting anymore. I would assume, that he's doing it because he needs the money, which is very sad. That's usually the reason old past their prime fighters come back and fight again. I mean, this I'm doing it for the fans really doesn't hold water with me, because if they weren't paid, I don't think they'd still do it for the fans. So for me, it's another symptom of what ails boxing. And I'll also note that if you look at what's happening in Saudi Arabia, they've had some very good fights, but they've also trended more and more towards trash boxing. They had, was it Tommy Fury and Jake Paul? They had Francis Ngannou against Tyson Fury. They had Anthony Joshua against Ngannou. Now they're talking about Conor Benn and Manny Pacquiao. And, His Excellency, says that he's a big boxing fan, and I believe it. And, when he said his 2 favorite fighters were Larry Holmes and Roberto Duran, a lot of boxing purists said, well, yeah, this guy really has an appreciation for good boxing. To me, Manny Pacquiao against Conor Benn does not advance the cause of good boxing.
Thomas, a great place to leave it. It's been a pleasure speaking to you again. Looking forward and wishing you all the success in the launch of your latest book. Thank you for speaking to SecondsOut, sir. Hopefully we'll catch up very, very soon.
Okay, thank you.